a paralyzed CEO for 30 years, until a stranger the world barely noticed dared to say what no one else would. High above Manhattan, where power and isolation live side by side, Evelyn Carter had long accepted she would never walk again. But one quiet sentence from Marcus Reed, a black delivery driver, shook everything she believed. Was it just a mistake? Or the truth she'd been denied for decades? The glass walls of the 50th floor office reflected the city like a silent witness. Manhattan stretched endlessly beyond them. Yellow taxis crawling through traffic, steam rising from subway grates, the Hudson catching the pale morning light. From up here, everything looked controlled, predictable, manageable. Evelyn Carter liked it that way. She sat behind her desk, perfectly still, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. The only movement in the room came from the faint glow of her dual monitors and the slow, steady ticking of a minimalist clock mounted behind her. People often said she had built an empire. What they never said out loud was how she had built it. From a wheelchair. 30 years earlier, a car accident had taken away everything below her waist. Every specialist, every neurologist, every expert with a polished office and framed degrees had told her the same thing in slightly different words: permanent, irreversible, final. At some point, she had stopped hearing the words, not because they changed, but because she had accepted them. Acceptance for Evelyn didn't mean peace, it meant control. Her phone buzzed once, she ignored it. Her assistant would handle it. Her entire life was structured that way. Systems, buffers, layers between her and anything unpredictable. She adjusted a document on her desk, reviewing numbers that most people in the room downstairs wouldn't understand for another 2 hours. Logistics, supply chains, margins, things that made sense, things that didn't lie. A soft knock came at the door. Before she could respond, it opened slightly. A young assistant stepped in, hesitant. "Ms. Carter, there's a delivery. Have them leave it with security," Evelyn said without looking up. "They said it needs a signature." A pause. Evelyn exhaled slowly, not irritated, just calculating the disruption. "Send them in." The assistant nodded quickly and disappeared, closing the door behind her. For a moment, the office returned to silence. The hum of the city far below barely reached this height. Then the door opened again. He stepped in carefully, like he wasn't sure if he belonged there. Marcus Reed. His jacket was clean but worn at the edges. His boots carried faint dust from the streets below. In his hands was a medium-sized box, the kind that moved through the city unnoticed 1,000 times a day. Except this time, it didn't. "Delivery for Evelyn Carter," he said, his voice steady but quiet. She finally looked up. Her eyes moved over him in a quick, efficient assessment, like she evaluated everything else. Not judgment, exactly. Just categorization. Not important. "Set it there," she said, nodding toward the edge of her desk. He stepped forward, placing the box down with care. Not rushed, not careless, just careful. That was the first thing she noticed without realizing it. He didn't leave immediately, most people would have. Instead, he hesitated. It was subtle, just a shift in weight, a moment that stretched half a second too long. Evelyn's eyes flicked back to her screen. "Is there something else?" He looked like he was about to say no, then he didn't. "Ma'am?" She didn't like the tone. It carried something she wasn't used to hearing in this room. Uncertainty. She looked up again, sharper this time. "What is it?" Marcus glanced down, at her feet, at the perfectly still legs that hadn't moved in 3 decades. And then he said it. "Your foot just moved." The words hung in the air. For a second, nothing existed beyond them. Evelyn blinked once, then twice. She followed his gaze, looking down at her own foot like it belonged to someone else. Still, completely still. When she looked back at him, her expression had hardened, not dramatically, but with precision, like a door closing. I'm sorry, she said. Marcus didn't back away. I saw it, he said, quieter now but more certain, when you leaned forward. Your foot. It moved. Silence filled the office, thick and heavy. Evelyn felt something rise in her chest, something sharp and familiar. Not hope, something closer to irritation. No, defense. I think you're mistaken, she said, her voice calm, controlled, almost polite. I know what I saw, that did it, not because he argued, but because he didn't, because he said it like a fact. Evelyn's grip tightened slightly on the armrest of her chair. I've had the best specialists in the world evaluate my condition, she said, each word placed carefully. For 30 years, Marcus nodded. I believe that. The answer caught her off guard. It wasn't dismissive, it wasn't challenging, it was accepting, and that made it worse. Then you understand, she said. I understand what they told you, he replied. A pause. Then softer. But sometimes, things don't stay exactly the way they were. Evelyn stared at him. People didn't talk to her like this. Not here. Not in this office, where every word was measured, and every person understood their place. And yet, something in his voice didn't feel like overstepping. It felt like observation, uninvited, uncomfortable, but real. She looked down again. Her foot didn't move. Of course it didn't. It never had. It never would. That was the rule. That was the truth she had built her life around. When she looked back up, the moment had passed. You for the delivery, she said, her tone final. Marcus held her gaze for a second longer. Not defiant, not submissive, just steady. Then he nodded once. Yes, ma'am. He turned and walked out of the office, closing the door behind him with quiet care. The room returned to silence. Evelyn didn't move. Her eyes stayed on the door for a moment longer than necessary. Then she forced herself to look back at the screen. Numbers, columns, certainty. But something had shifted, small, noticeable. Like a hairline crack in glass, she tried to ignore it. Focused on the report, adjusted a figure, reread a line she had already read. But her mind kept drifting, back to his voice, back to the way he said it. Not dramatic, not hopeful, just certain. Your foot just moved. Evelyn exhaled slowly and leaned forward, just slightly, the way she always did when reaching for a pen. Her eyes dropped, almost against her will. Nothing, still. Course. She leaned back again, a faint tension settling in her shoulders. This was ridiculous. One stranger, one sentence. That was all it took to disturb something she had spent 30 years locking down. She pressed her lips together, turned back to her work, but the numbers no longer felt as solid. The silence no longer felt as controlled. And somewhere, deep beneath the structure she had built so carefully, a question had started forming. Quiet, unwelcome, impossible. What if he wasn't wrong? And if he wasn't, then what had she been living with all this time? The city outside kept moving, unaware. Traffic flowed. People hurried, life went on. But inside the glass walls of the 50th floor, for the first time in 30 years, Evelyn Carter wasn't completely certain anymore. The thought followed her home. It stayed with her in the back seat of the black sedan as it moved through evening traffic, headlights streaking across the wet pavement. It lingered in the quiet elevator ride up to her penthouse, in the reflection of her own face in the mirrored walls. Calm, composed, controlled, but not untouched. Her driver opened the door for her without a word. He had worked for her long enough to understand silence wasn't emptiness. It was preference. The penthouse greeted her the way it always did. Soft lighting, polished floors, the faint scent of something expensive and neutral. It was a place designed to feel like success. It never felt like home. She wheeled herself across the open space, past floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city like a living painting. Down below, Manhattan pulsed with life. People rushed, laughed, argued, lived in ways she hadn't allowed herself to consider in years. She stopped near the glass. Her reflection hovered faintly over the skyline, and before she could stop her eyes dropped to her foot, still, unmoving, the way it had always been. Evelyn exhaled slowly, almost annoyed at herself. This was ridiculous. One man, one sentence. She turned away, moving toward the kitchen. Her assistant had already arranged dinner. Something balanced, something efficient. She didn't bother sitting at the table. She rarely did. Instead, she ate sitting at the counter, reading through reports on her tablet. Numbers, facts, certainty. But every few seconds, her mind drifted. Back to his voice. Back to the way he didn't sound unsure. You should check it again. She set the tablet down, just for a second. Her hand rested on the cold marble surface as she stared at nothing in particular. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She leaned forward, slowly, deliberately, her eyes fixed on her foot. Nothing, not even a flicker. Of course not. Evelyn let out a quiet breath, somewhere between relief and something she didn't want to name. She sat back again. This was why she had stopped hoping. Hope was inefficient. Hope disrupted focus. Hope created questions that didn't have answers. And she didn't build a billion-dollar company on questions. She picked up her tablet again, forcing her attention back where it belonged. But the numbers blurred just slightly, enough to matter. Across the city, in the neighborhood that didn't have glass walls or quiet elevators, Marcus Reed was carrying a bag of groceries up 3 flights of stairs. The building smelled faintly of old paint and something fried. The hallway lights flickered in uneven rhythms, casting shadows that stretched and disappeared with each step. He didn't notice anymore. He shifted the weight of the bag in his hand and knocked lightly on the apartment door with his elbow. It swung open before he could knock again. "Daddy!" A small figure launched toward him, nearly knocking the bag from his grip. Marcus laughed, steadying himself as he bent down slightly. Hey, careful, Nia." His daughter looked up at him, her smile wide and unfiltered, the kind that didn't care about bills or deadlines or the price of groceries. "You're late," she said, though there was no real accusation in it. "Got stuck in Midtown," he replied. "Big building, slow elevators. That means rich people," she said matter-of-factly. Marcus smiled, usually does. She stepped back, letting him in. The apartment was small, 2 rooms and a kitchen that barely qualified as one, but it was clean, lived in, warm in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. He set the groceries on the counter and started unpacking. "You eat?" he asked. Nia nodded, already pulling out a notebook from the table. "Mrs. Alvarez gave me soup." "Good. You say thank you?" "I always say thank you." He glanced at her, a hint of pride softening his expression. "I know you do." The room filled with the quiet sounds of evening, paper rustling, the hum of an old refrigerator, distant traffic bleeding through the thin walls. Marcus moved with practiced ease, putting things away, checking the small details that made a difference in a place like this. A loose cabinet hinge, a flickering bulb, things he fixed without thinking, things most people didn't notice. "Dad," Nia said suddenly. "Yeah? Did anything interesting happen today?"
Did you finish your drawing?
He paused for just a second, then shook his head lightly. Same as always, it wasn't a lie. Not exactly. But it wasn't the whole truth either, because as he turned back to the counter, his mind drifted. To a quiet office, to a woman who looked at the world like it had rules, and to a moment that didn't fit those rules. He leaned against the counter, arms folded loosely. "You ever see something," he said slowly, "that doesn't make sense, but you know you didn't imagine it?" Nia didn't look up from her notebook. "That's like when I saw the cat on the fire escape and you said it wasn't there," Marcus chuckled. "There was no cat. There was," she insisted, still writing. "You just didn't see it." He watched her for a moment, then nodded to himself. Yeah, he said quietly. Maybe. He pushed the thought aside. There were things in life you didn't chase, things that didn't belong to you. A woman like that. Someone who lived 50 floors above the city. She had her own world, her own rules, her own people. He was just a guy who delivered boxes, not someone who changed anything. He grabbed a glass, filled it with water, and took a long sip. Homework done? I asked. Almost. Good. He turned off the kitchen light, leaving only the warm glow from the living area. Outside, a bus roared past, its brakes squealing as it stopped at the corner. Life moved on, it always did, but somewhere between the noise and the quiet, between the penthouse and the small apartment, between certainty and doubt, a thread had formed, invisible, uninvited, and neither of them knew yet how much it would change everything. Back in her penthouse, Evelyn sat in the dim light of her bedroom, the city stretched out before her, endless and alive. Her phone rested in her hand. She hadn't meant to pick it up. She hadn't meant to think about it again. But her thumb hovered over the screen anyway. Then, almost without thinking, she opened her email, scrolled, stopped. There it was, a simple message. No signature, no formatting, just a single line. You should check it again. Evelyn stared at it. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark screen edges. For a long moment, she didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't think. And then, very slowly, she leaned forwards again. Her eyes dropped, her focus narrowed. Waiting, hoping. No. She stopped herself, but something inside her didn't stop. Something quiet, something stubborn, something she had buried a long time ago. And as the city lights flickered in the distance, Evelyn Carter sat in the dark, staring at a part of herself she had stopped believing in, and wondering, what if she had been wrong? The question didn't go away. It followed Evelyn into the morning like a shadow she couldn't shake. By 5:30 a.m., she was already at her desk again, the city still gray and half awake beyond the glass. The cleaning crew had come and gone, leaving everything polished, silent, untouched. This was her favorite time of day. Before people arrived, before conversations, before expectations, before anything unpredictable. She stared at the report in front of her, but the numbers didn't settle the way they usually did. They shifted, not on the screen, but in her mind. Her assistant knocked softly. "You have a call at 7, Ms. Carter." "I know," Evelyn replied, not looking up. A pause lingered at the door, as if the assistant wanted to say something more. Then that door closed again. Evelyn exhaled. Her hand moved to the keyboard, but instead of typing, she stopped, and without fully deciding to, she opened her email. The message was still there. No signature, no branding, no attempt to impress, just, "You should check it again." She read it once, then again. It wasn't persuasive. It wasn't emotional. It didn't try to convince her. It just existed, like a fact waiting to be acknowledged. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. Then she did something that would have surprised anyone who knew her. She picked up her phone and dialed. Marcus was halfway through fixing a broken toaster in Mrs. Alvarez's apartment when his phone buzzed. He wiped his hands on a towel and glanced at the screen. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. Almost. "Hello?" There was a pause on the other end. Then, "This is Evelyn Carter." Marcus straightened slightly, instinctively. He wasn't used to voices like that calling him directly. Clear, controlled, used to being heard. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Another pause. Shorter this time. "I received your email," she said. "I wasn't sure you would." "I'm not sure I should have." That sounded more like the person he remembered from the office. Marcus leaned against the counter, lowering his voice out of respect for the quiet apartment around him. "I wasn't trying to," he started. I know, she cut in, not harshly, just precisely. You weren't trying to do anything. That was what made this strange. People always tried to do something, sell something, gain something, prove something. He hadn't, and she didn't know what to do with that. I have a question, Evelyn said. Okay, when you said you saw movement. She hesitated, just slightly. What exactly did you see? Marcus looked down at his hand, still holding the screwdriver. He replayed the moment in his head. The toes, he said slowly. Just a little, like when someone presses down without thinking. Evelyn didn't respond immediately. He could almost hear her processing it. Not a twitch? She asked. No, not a spasm. No, ma'am. What makes you so certain? Marcus considered the question. Most people would have tried to sound convincing. He didn't. I've worked around broken things most of my life, he said. Machines, systems, stuff people throw away. A small pause. They don't all break the same way, he continued. Some things stop working. Some things just stop being used. Silence again. But this time, it felt different. He wasn't feeling it, neither was she. I'm not a doctor, he added. I'm aware, Evelyn said. He almost smiled. But I know what I saw, he finished. The words landed quietly, not pushing, not demanding, just there. Evelyn looked out at the city as she held the phone to her ear. A ferry moved slowly across the river, cutting through the water like it had a destination it understood. She hadn't felt that in a long time. Certainty. I've had specialists review my condition for years, she said. I believe that. They were very clear. I'm sure they were. She frowned slightly. You don't sound convinced. Marcus shifted his weight. I sound like someone who wasn't there when they looked, he said. But I was there when I saw it. That stopped her. Not because it challenged her, but because it didn't. It simply placed two realities side by side and didn't try to force one to win. Evelyn's fingers tightened slightly around the phone. She hadn't had a conversation like this in years, not one that didn't revolve around outcomes, decisions, or expectations. This one had no direction, no agenda, just a question. What would you do, she asked quietly, if you were in my position? Marcus didn't answer right away. He didn't rush, didn't offer something polished. He thought. I'd check, he said. That's it? That's it. She almost expected more. A speech, a reason. But that was all he gave her. Check, like it was simple, like it didn't carry 30 years of weight behind it. Evelyn let out a slow breath. I'll consider it, she said. That's all I was hoping for. Another pause. Then, thank you, she said. The words surprised both of them. Marcus nodded, even though she couldn't see him. You're welcome. The call ended. For a long moment, Evelyn didn't move. The phone was still in her hand. The city still stretched endlessly outside. But something had shifted again. Not the world, not her body, just her position inside it. She turned slightly, her eyes drifting down once more. Her foot remained still, unchanged, unmoving. But this time, she didn't look at it with certainty. She looked at it like a question. Later that morning, in a hospital on the Upper East Side, a neurologist adjusted his glasses as he reviewed Evelyn Carter's file. 30 years, he murmured. Yes, Evelyn said calmly. I'm aware. He looked at her, then back at the file. And what brings you in today? She held his gaze. Something changed, she said. The doctor didn't respond right away. He had heard variations of that sentence before. Hope, misinterpretation, desperation. But something in her tone wasn't any of those. It was controlled, measured, almost reluctant. I'd like to run a full evaluation, he said carefully. Evelyn nodded once. Do it. As the nurse prepared the equipment, Evelyn sat still in the sterile room, the hum of machines filling the space. Her hands rested calmly in her lap, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. But inside, the silence she had built over decades was beginning to crack. And somewhere, far below the layers of certainty, hope moved, just slightly, just enough to matter. And this time, she didn't look away. The hospital room was colder than she expected, not physically, not enough to matter. But there was a stillness to it, clean, controlled, stripped of anything unnecessary, that felt almost surgical even before a single test had begun. Evelyn sat in her chair beside the examination table, her reflection faintly visible in the dark screen of a nearby monitor. A nurse adjusted a set of wires with practiced efficiency, her movements quiet, professional. "Just relax your legs," the nurse said gently, as if that had ever been something Evelyn could do. Evelyn didn't respond. She simply watched, every motion, every detail, because for the first time in years, this wasn't routine, this wasn't maintenance, this was a question. The neurologist stepped back into the room holding a tablet. He glanced at the readings, then at Evelyn, then back again. "I'm going to run a stimulation test," he said. "You may feel something, or nothing at all. Either is expected. Evelyn almost smiled at that word. Everything in her life had been built on expectations, and right now, she didn't trust any of them. "Go ahead," she said. The nurse placed small sensors along her leg, points mapped with clinical precision. The machine hummed softly as it powered up, a low, steady sound that filled the room without drawing attention to itself. The neurologist pressed a button. There was a pause, a beat of silence that stretched longer than it should have. Evelyn stared at her leg. "Nothing." "Of course," the doctor nodded slightly, as if confirming what he already believed. "We'll increase the intensity," he said. Another press, another pulse. Still nothing. Evelyn's gaze didn't shift, didn't soften, didn't hope, but somewhere beneath the surface something was listening. The machine adjusted again, a third pulse, stronger this time, and then, there it was, not dramatic, not obvious, not something anyone else in the room would have noticed if they hadn't been looking for it. A faint, almost imperceptible tightening, a signal, a whisper. Evelyn's breath caught. "Just for a second, did you see that?" the nurse asked quietly. The neurologist didn't answer immediately. His eyes narrowed, focusing on the screen, then on Evelyn's leg. "We'll run that again," he said. His voice had changed. Not much, but enough. He pressed the button once more. The pulse traveled through the wires, invisible, mechanical, and again, that same response, small, uncertain, but real. The room shifted, not physically, but in meaning. "What does that mean?" Evelyn asked, her voice steady, though something underneath it wasn't. The neurologist hesitated, for the first time since she had met him. "It means," he said carefully, "that there may be residual activity below the injury site." Residual. The word landed somewhere between hope and caution. "It shouldn't be there," he added. Evelyn stared at him. "Then why is it?" He didn't answer right away, because he didn't know, and that was something Evelyn hadn't heard from someone like him in a very long time. "I'd like to run more comprehensive imaging," he said finally. "There are newer technologies, things that weren't available even 10 years ago. 10 years. Evelyn's jaw tightened slightly. She thought about all the years before that. All the times she had sat in rooms just like this one, listening to conclusions delivered with absolute certainty. Permanent, irreversible, final. She looked back down at her leg, still, silent, but no longer empty. Do it, she said. Outside, the city moved the way it always did. Cars honked, people rushed. No one knew that something impossible had just shifted, not dramatically, not enough to make headlines, but enough to matter. Marcus was standing at a bus stop when his phone buzzed again. This time he recognized the number. He didn't answer right away, not because he didn't want to, but because he wasn't sure what this was becoming. The bus roared past without stopping, its brakes squealing as it pulled away down the street. A cold wind followed it, carrying the smell of rain and asphalt. He finally picked up. "Hello?" There was no hesitation this time. They found something. Her voice, clear, controlled, but different. Marcus straightened slightly. "What kind of something?" "A signal," she said. "Low, inconsistent, but it's there." He didn't speak, not because he didn't understand, but because he did. "I'm going back for more tests," she continued. "Full imaging, updated scans." A pause. "I wanted to tell you." That part surprised him. "Why?" he asked quietly. Silence, then, "I don't know," she said, and that might have been the most honest thing she had said to him yet. Marcus leaned against the metal pole of the bus stop, the cold surface pressing through his jacket. "Sounds like you're doing what you said you would," he replied. "I said I would consider it. You did more than consider." Another pause, shorter this time. "Do you think it means something?" she asked. There it was. Not the CEO, not the person who controlled everything. Just a question. Marcus looked out at the street, at the people moving past him, at the ordinary rhythm of a day that didn't know it was part of something bigger. "I think it means you weren't wrong to check," he said. "That's not what I asked." "I know." She waited. He didn't rush, didn't try to give her what she wanted. "I think it means there's something there," he said finally. "And now you get to decide what to do with that." Evelyn stood by the window in her office. The city stretched out below her once again. But it didn't look the same. Not anymore. "What if it doesn't lead anywhere?" she asked. "Then at least you'll know," he said. "And if it does?" Marcus let out a quiet breath. "Then everything changes." The words settled between them, not dramatic, not exaggerated, just true. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment. She had built her entire life on certainty, on knowing exactly what was possible and what wasn't. And now, that line was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. Possibility. "I'll keep you updated, she said. "You don't have to." "I know." A pause. Then, "Goodbye, Marcus. Goodbye, Ms. Carter." The line went quiet. Back in the office, Evelyn remained still for a long moment. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass. But this time it looked different. Not because anything had changed, but because something might. And that was enough to unsettle everything. Behind her, the door opened slightly. Her assistant stepped in, careful not to interrupt. "Ms. Carter, the board meeting has been moved up to this afternoon." Of course it had. The world didn't pause for uncertainty. It never did. "Understood," Evelyn said. The assistant hesitated. "You look different," she said softly, before she could stop herself. Evelyn turned slightly. "Do I?" The assistant nodded, then quickly shook her head, unsure of herself. I'm sorry, I didn't." "It's fine," Evelyn said. And for once, she meant it, because for the first time in 30 years, something inside her wasn't locked in place anymore. It wasn't stable, it wasn't certain, but it was alive, and she didn't know yet whether that was the most dangerous thing that had ever happened to her, or the most important. But she was about to find out. The boardroom smelled faintly of polished wood and expensive coffee. 12 people sat around the long glass table, each of them dressed in quiet authority. Tailored suits, measured expressions, the kind of presence that didn't need to raise its voice to be heard. Evelyn Carter rolled into the room 5 minutes early. She always did. Control wasn't just about decisions. It was about timing. As she positioned herself at the head of the table, conversation softened, then disappeared completely. Eyes shifted toward her, some respectful, some calculating. One of them, Helen Brooks, watched her a little more closely than the others. Helen didn't smile. She never smiled in meetings. "Let's begin," Evelyn said. Her voice was steady, precise, exactly what they expected, exactly who she had always been. But something beneath it had shifted, and Helen noticed. The meeting moved quickly. Quarterly reports, expansion strategies, logistics contracts. Numbers filled the room, projections layered over projections, decisions stacking neatly on top of one another. Evelyn led with her usual clarity, sharp, efficient, unquestioned. And yet, there was a moment, just a second, when she paused. It happened when one of the analysts mentioned long-term infrastructure planning. 20-year projections. 20 years. The words echoed in her mind longer than they should have. Long enough for Helen to lean slightly forward. "Something on your mind, Evelyn?" she asked, her tone smooth, neutral, but edged with something sharper beneath. Evelyn met her gaze. "No," she said. And just like that, the moment passed. But Helen didn't look convinced. Across the city, Marcus was crouched behind a laundromat, tightening a loose valve on an old water line. The owner, a tired man in his 60s, hovered nearby, wiping his hands on a rag. "I can't pay you for this," he said again, almost apologetically. Marcus didn't look up. "I didn't ask you to." The man shook his head. "You always say that." Marcus gave a small smile. "And you always keep the machines running." The valve clicked into place. The low hiss of escaping air stopped. Marcus stood, wiping his hands. "Try it now." The owner flipped the switch. The machine hummed to life, steady and smooth. For a moment, the man just stared at it. Then he let out a breath he'd probably been holding for days. "Thank you," he said quietly. Marcus nodded. "No problem." He grabbed his jacket and stepped out into the alley, the late afternoon light catching the edges of buildings in a soft orange glow. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a message from Nia. "Don't forget milk." He smiled, typing back quickly. "Got it." He slipped the phone away and started walking. No audience, no recognition, just another small thing fixed. Another quiet act that didn't change the world. Except it did, just not in a way anyone could measure. That evening, rain began to fall, not heavy at first, just enough to blur the edges of the city. Evelyn sat alone in her penthouse again. The lights dim, the skyline shimmering behind glass streaked with water. Her laptop was open, but untouched. Instead, her eyes were fixed on something far less complicated. Her foot, still, silent, and yet not meaningless anymore. She leaned forward slightly, focused, waited. Nothing. The silence stretched. She sat back, exhaling slowly, the tension in her shoulders tightening just a fraction. This was the part no one talked about, the waiting, the space between possibility and proof. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't inspiring, it was exhausting. Her phone lit up beside her. She glanced at it. A message from Marcus. She hadn't expected that. "You don't have to believe anything yet." She read it once, then again. Another message followed. "Just don't ignore what's real." Evelyn stared at the screen. There was no pressure in his words, no demand, no expectation, just presence, the kind she wasn't used to, the kind that didn't come with conditions. She typed a response, stopped, deleted it, then typed again. "What if I'm wrong?" The reply came slower this time, long enough for her to notice the silence. "Then you'll know you tried." Evelyn's fingers hovered over the screen. "And if I'm right?" This time, the response took even longer. Across the city, Marcus sat at his small kitchen table, Nia asleep in the next room, her notebook still open where she had been drawing earlier. He stared at the message for a moment before answering. Because this wasn't about him. Not really. Then everything changes. He hit send. Evelyn read the words. Simple, direct, unavoidable. Everything changes. She looked out at the city again. The rain had picked up now, streaking across the glass in uneven lines, distorting the lights below into something softer, less defined. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel in control, and strangely, she didn't hate it. The next morning, the hospital called. Additional tests scheduled. More data, more waiting, more uncertainty. Evelyn confirmed without hesitation, because now there was no going back, not really. Meanwhile, Marcus stood in line at a small grocery store in the Bronx, holding a carton of milk and a few other essentials. A woman in front of him struggled to count out change, her hands shaking slightly. People behind them sighed, shifted, waited impatiently. Marcus didn't say anything. He just stepped forward and quietly placed a few bills on the counter. "I've got it," he said. The woman looked up, startled. "You don't have to, I know." She hesitated, then nodded, her eyes soft with something she didn't say out loud. "Thank you," Marcus smiled. "No problem." He picked up his bag and stepped back into the street, the rain still falling, the city still moving. He didn't think about Evelyn, not in that moment. He didn't think about changing anything. Because that wasn't who he was. He just did what was in front of him. And somehow, that was exactly what had set everything in motion. Back in Manhattan, Evelyn Carter sat in another sterile room, machines humming around her once again. But this time, she wasn't just waiting for answers. She was ready for them. And somewhere deep inside, that quiet, stubborn feeling had grown just enough to matter. Hope, not loud, not overwhelming, but there, and impossible to ignore. The machine clicked softly as it powered down. Evelyn sat motionless, the faint adhesive marks still clinging to her skin where the sensors had been placed. The room had returned to silence, but it wasn't the same silence as before. It felt heavier, like something had been said without words. The neurologist stood across from her, reviewing the final readings on his tablet. His expression wasn't alarmed. It wasn't excited either. It was careful. That unsettled her more than anything. "Well?" she asked. He looked up, adjusting his glasses slightly. "There's consistent activity," he said. "More than I expected." Evelyn didn't react immediately, had learned a long time ago not to respond too quickly to anything that sounded like hope. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means," he said slowly, "that your injury may not be as complete as originally diagnosed. May not be. Originally diagnosed." The words echoed in her mind like cracks forming in something solid. "That's not possible," she said automatically. "It's unlikely," he corrected. "But not impossible." Evelyn's gaze dropped to her hands, resting calmly in her lap. 30 years of certainty, and now, unlikely. She looked back up. "If that's true," she said, her voice quieter now, "then why wasn't it found before?" The doctor hesitated. "There are several reasons that could explain it," he said. "Limitations in earlier technology, changes over time, incomplete mapping of nerve pathways." He paused. "But I can't give you a definitive answer yet." Evelyn held his gaze. She didn't like uncertainty. She didn't like answers that weren't answers, but something in her, something new, was forcing her to stay. "What happens next?" she asked. "We start a rehabilitation protocol," he said. "Carefully, gradually. We see how your body responds, and if it doesn't, then we reassess, and if it does." He didn't answer right away, because that answer carried weight. "It could change things," he said finally. Evelyn almost laughed. Could. Everything was could now. No guarantees, no certainty, just possibility. And possibility, she realized, was far more dangerous than certainty had ever been. Schedule it, she said. The first session was nothing like she expected. There were no dramatic moments, no sudden breakthroughs, just a quiet room on a lower floor of the hospital, where the lights were softer and the walls were lined with equipment that looked more functional than impressive. A therapist named Daniel greeted her with a firm handshake and an easy smile. "We're going to start simple," he said. "No pressure." Evelyn nodded. Pressure was all she knew. He guided her through the first steps, not physical steps, but exercises, sensory mapping, electrical stimulation, small, controlled inputs designed to test responses that had been ignored for decades. At first, nothing, then something, not movement, not even sensation in the way most people would describe it, but a faint awareness, like a distant echo. Evelyn's breath caught. "Did you feel that?" Daniel asked. She hesitated. "I don't know," she said. That was the truth, because whatever it was, it didn't fit into any category she understood. "That's okay," he said. "We're not looking for certainty yet." Evelyn almost smiled at that. Of course they weren't, because certainty was the one thing she no longer had. That night she didn't sleep, not really. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the city lights flickering faintly through the windows. Her body felt different, not stronger, not healed, just aware. And it was unsettling, because awareness meant possibility, and possibility meant risk. At 2:13 a.m., she sat up. Without thinking, she reached for her phone. Marcus answered on the second ring. "You okay?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep, but alert in an instant. Evelyn paused. She hadn't planned what to say. "I had my first session," she said, a small rustle on his end. He was sitting up now, and she looked down at her legs, barely visible in the dim light. "I don't know," she said. He didn't interrupt, didn't fill the silence. "I felt something," she continued. "Or maybe I didn't. I can't tell." "That sounds like something," he said. She let out a quiet breath. "It's not clear. It doesn't have to be." Another pause, this one longer, more honest. "It's exhausting," she admitted. There it was, the truth she wouldn't say to anyone else. The truth that didn't fit into board meetings or quarterly reports. Marcus didn't respond right away. He knew that kind of exhaustion. Not physical, not even mental. The kind that came from holding something uncertain for too long. "Yeah," he said finally. "It is." Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. "I don't know if I can do this," she said. The words surprised her. She wasn't someone who said things like that, ever. Marcus leaned back against his headboard, the faint glow of a streetlight slipping through his window. "You don't have to do all of it tonight," he said. She frowned slightly. "That's not what I meant, I know," he said. "But it still applies." Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable. Just there. "I keep thinking about what happens if it doesn't work," she said. And I don't know if I can go back to the way things were." Marcus nodded slowly. "That makes sense, does it?" "Yeah." She waited. "Because now you've seen something different," he said. "Even if it's small." Evelyn opened her eyes again. "And if it disappears," he considered that. "Then it was still real," he said. "Even if it didn't last." She sat with that, let it settle. It didn't fix anything. It didn't make the fear go away. But it shifted something, just enough. "You're not very comforting," she said quietly. Marcus smiled to himself. "I'm not trying to be." That made her almost laugh. Almost. The next morning, the boardroom felt colder, not physically, but politically. Helen Brooks sat across from her, hands folded neatly on the table, her gaze sharp and observant. "We've noticed a shift in your schedule," Helen said smoothly. Evelyn didn't react. "My schedule is managed appropriately," she replied. "Of course," Helen said. "But there are concerns." From who? Helen's smile was thin. From people who are invested in stability. Evelyn leaned back slightly in her chair. And you believe I'm unstable? I believe, Helen said carefully, that any significant personal development could impact leadership performance. There it was. Not an accusation, not directly, but close enough. Evelyn held her gaze. I'm still here, she said. For now, Helen replied. The room went quiet. The others didn't speak, didn't move. They were watching, evaluating, waiting. Evelyn felt it, the pressure, the shift, the moment where control could slip. If she let it, but she didn't. Not here, not now. Then let's proceed, she said calmly. And just like that, the meeting continued. But something had changed. Not just in her, in the room, in the way they looked at her, in the way they calculated. Hope had a cost, and she was starting to understand exactly what that cost would be. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Evelyn sat alone once again in her office. The city glowed gold for a brief moment before fading into blue. She looked down at her legs, still, quiet, uncertain, but no longer meaningless, and for the first time, she didn't just see what was missing, she saw what might still be there, and that was enough to keep going, even if it cost her everything. For Marcus Reed, everything had always come at a cost. The Bronx didn't give you anything for free, not dignity, not opportunity, and definitely not second chances. It gave you noise, sirens echoing through narrow streets, neon flickering over corner stores, the low hum of survival that never really stopped. Marcus knew how to live inside that hum. He woke before the sun most mornings, long before the subway lines filled, before the city stretched itself awake. His daughter, Lila, still slept in the small bedroom down the hall, wrapped in a blanket that had seen better years but still held warmth. He stood in the kitchen, pouring coffee into a chipped mug, staring at nothing in particular. His phone buzzed. Work. Another route. Another list of deliveries. Another day moving through buildings where he was seen, but not really looked at. He grabbed his keys and left quietly. By mid-morning, he was in Newark. The logistics warehouse sat between two highways, a block of concrete and steel surrounded by trucks idling in long, impatient lines. The air smelled like diesel and metal, like everything was always in motion, and nothing ever really arrived. Marcus moved through it with ease. He'd done this long enough to understand the rhythm. Paperwork first, then crates, then signatures that no one really read. He was loading a shipment when something caught his eye. A label. Not unusual, except he recognized the company name, Carter Global Holdings, Evelyn's company. He paused, hand resting on the edge of the crate. He wasn't supposed to look deeper, wasn't supposed to care. But something about it, he checked the manifest. Medical equipment, specialized, old shipment records attached. That was strange. Most deliveries didn't carry archival references unless something had been flagged before. He hesitated, then opened the digital file. The screen flickered slightly under the warehouse lights. Dates scrolled past. 5 years ago, 10, then 20. Marcus frowned. Who keeps records like this? He scrolled further, and then he saw it. A shipment sent to a private neurological clinic in Boston. 20 years ago. Client, Carter Global Holdings. Purpose, Neural Pathway Mapping System. Status, delivered. Then 2 weeks later, status, returned, unused. Marcus blinked. That didn't make sense. Like that wasn't cheap. It wasn't optional either. If you ordered it, you used it. Unless... He leaned back slightly, the noise of the warehouse fading just enough for the thought to settle. Unless someone didn't want it used. His jaw tightened. No, he muttered to himself. He wasn't jumping to conclusions. Could be a mistake, could be duplicate equipment, could be anything. But He kept scrolling, cross-referencing, digging deeper than he normally would. And the more he looked, the less it felt like a mistake. The shipment had been specifically requested, personally authorized, paid in full, and then sent back untouched. Marcus stared at the screen for a long moment. He thought about Evelyn, about the way she had looked at him in that office, controlled, guarded, like someone who had learned to protect herself from disappointment, about the way her voice had shifted on the phone when she admitted she didn't know if she could keep going, about the possibility that she had been denied something she should have had, not by chance, but by choice. His chest tightened. He didn't like this, didn't like where it was going, but he also couldn't ignore it. Not now, not after everything that had already started. That night, he sat at the small kitchen table in his apartment, laptop open, Lila asleep in the next room. The city outside was loud in that familiar way. Cars passing, voices rising and falling, life continuing whether you were ready for it or not. Marcus didn't notice. He was focused, pulling records, comparing data, looking for something that proved he was wrong. He wanted to be wrong, needed to be, because the alternative. He exhaled slowly. The alternative meant someone had made a decision for Evelyn a long time ago, a decision that shaped her entire life. He rubbed his hands over his face. "You don't know that," he said quietly. "Not yet, but it was starting to look that way." He checked the authorization code again. Corporate account, but not just any account. Executive level, restricted access. Marcus leaned back in his chair. That kind of authorization didn't come from a random employee. It came from the top, from someone who had the power to make choices no one else could question. Someone like... He stopped the thought. Didn't want to finish it. Didn't want to put that name into something that might not be real. But it was there anyway, hanging in the air, unspoken, heavy. His phone sat on the table beside him. He stared at it. He could call her, right now, tell her everything. Or at least, what he thought everything might be. But what if he was wrong? What if he planted doubt where there didn't need to be any? What if he broke something that didn't need breaking? Marcus tapped his fingers against the table, thinking, weighing, because this wasn't like telling someone their foot moved. This was different. This had consequences. Stood up, pacing the small space between the table and the counter. Lila shifted in her sleep down the hall, a soft sound that grounded him for a moment. He stopped, closed his eyes briefly, then looked at the phone again. "She deserves to know," he said under his breath, "even if it hurt, even if it changed everything, especially then." He picked up the phone, dialed, and waited. Evelyn answered on the third ring. "Marcus," she said, her voice steady but alert. He swallowed. "Yeah, it's me." A pause. "You okay?" He let out a quiet breath. "I found something," he said. Silence, not empty, focused. "What kind of something?" she asked. Marcus looked at the screen one last time, at the records, at the dates, at the decision that might have been made long before either of them stood in that office. "I'm not sure yet," he said carefully. "But I think..." He hesitated, because once he said it, there was no taking it back. "I think there's something about your medical history you don't know." The line went completely still. Evelyn didn't speak, didn't interrupt. But he could feel it, the shift, the moment something inside her braced for impact. "What are you saying?" she asked quietly. Marcus exhaled slowly. "I think," he said, choosing each word carefully, "that a test was supposed to be done on you a long time ago. And it wasn't." Another pause. Longer this time. "And you know this how?" she asked. "I don't know it for sure," he admitted. "But the records, Evelyn, the equipment was delivered, paid for, and then sent back unused." He heard her breathing, controlled, measured, too controlled. "When?" she asked, about 20 years ago. The silence that followed was different, heavier, like something was being pulled apart inside her. Who authorized it? She asked. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. I don't have a name, he said. Just a level of access, and it wasn't low level, he said. It was executive. The word landed between them like something solid. Evelyn didn't respond right away. When she did, her voice had changed. Not louder, not sharper, just colder. My father was alive 20 years ago, she said. Marcus didn't say anything, because there was nothing to say. Not yet. I need to see those records, she said. You will, he said. But I didn't want to send them without talking to you first. Why? He thought about that. Because the answer mattered. Because this isn't just data, he said. This is your life. Another silence. Then, send them, she said. Her voice was steady again. Too steady. I will, he said. She didn't hang up immediately. Neither did he. There was something else there. Something unspoken. What if it's true? She asked finally. The question barely above a whisper. Marcus looked out the window, at the city lights reflecting off glass and steel. Then you decide what it means, he said, and what happens next. He heard her exhale, slow, controlled, but not unshaken. Okay, she said, and then she hung up. Evelyn sat alone in her office, the phone still in her hand. The city stretched out below her, unchanged, but something inside her wasn't. Her father's voice echoed faintly in her memory, calm, certain, protective, and suddenly, not unquestionable. She turned her chair slowly toward the window. Her reflection stared back at her, still, controlled, unbreakable. But beneath that, something was cracking. Just enough to let doubt in, and once doubt entered, it didn't leave quietly. It stayed, growing, waiting for the truth. It arrived faster than she expected, and slower than she could bear. Evelyn didn't leave her office that night. She didn't call Marcus back, didn't open the files he sent. She just sat there, hands folded in her lap, staring at the city as if it might answer a question she wasn't ready to ask out loud. Midnight came and went. The skyline dimmed, then flickered back to life in scattered windows across Manhattan. Somewhere below, a siren cut through the quiet, then faded just as quickly. Nothing about the world had changed, but something inside her had shifted, and it wouldn't settle. Her phone buzzed softly on the desk. The files, Marcus had sent them. She didn't move for a long time, because opening them meant stepping into something she couldn't undo. And for the first time since she was 8 years old, Evelyn Carter hesitated. Not because she was afraid of pain, she had lived with pain. Not because she was afraid of disappointment. She had mastered disappointment. But because this was different. This wasn't about what had happened to her. This was about what might have been taken from her. And that kind of truth didn't just hurt. It rewrote everything. Finally, reached for the phone, opened the file. The screen lit up, cold and unforgiving. Dates, invoices, authorization codes, clinical notes. She read slowly, carefully, not missing a single word. The shipment order, the specialized neural mapping equipment, the urgency stamped across the request, and then the return, 2 weeks later, unused. Her fingers tightened around the phone. She scrolled further, more documents, more correspondence, emails, internal memos, professional language wrapped around something deeply personal. Her eyes stopped on a name, Dr. Harold Whitman. She knew that name. He had been one of the last specialists her father brought in, the one who had delivered the final conclusion. Permanent, irreversible, certain. Her breath slowed, almost mechanically, as she opened the next file, the email thread, the one Marcus had flagged. The first message was formal, measured, a request for confirmation. But the reply was different. It wasn't written for her. It wasn't meant for her. And that was exactly why it felt so raw. Proceed with standard evaluation only. No need for additional neural mapping at this stage. We need a definitive conclusion. Evelyn's eyes scanned the signature. Richard Carter, her father. The room didn't move, but something inside her did. Sharp, sudden, disorienting. She read it again and again, as if repetition might change the meaning. It didn't. Her father, the man who had spent years chasing every possibility, who had flown her across countries, who had sat beside hospital beds and promised her they would find a way. He had made the decision to stop looking, to close the door. Not because there was nothing left, but because he wanted an answer. A final one. Evelyn lowered the phone slowly. Her hands didn't shake. Her breathing stayed steady. But her chest felt tight, like something was pressing inward from every side. "No," she whispered. Not in denial, not entirely, just in disbelief. Because the man she remembered wouldn't have done that. Would he? Her mind pulled up images. Fragments. Her father standing in a hospital hallway, talking in low, urgent tones, the way his shoulders had slumped when another treatment failed. The silence that followed each no. She closed her eyes, trying to piece it together, trying to understand how someone who loved her that much could take something away from her, and then a memory surfaced, uninvited, unclear at first, then sharper. 17 years old, sitting in a clinic room, her father across from her, tired, older than she remembered. He had said something that day, something she hadn't understood at the time. Sometimes he had told her, "The hardest thing isn't fixing something, it's knowing when to stop." Evelyn's eyes opened slowly. The pieces shifted, not into something clean, not into something that made sense, but into something real. He hadn't stopped because he didn't care. He had stopped because he did. Too much. Because he couldn't watch her hope and lose again. Her jaw tightened. "That wasn't your choice," she said under her breath. The words landed in the empty office, flat, unanswered, because he wasn't there to hear them. He had been gone for over a decade. And yet, this decision, this moment, still reached into her life like it had happened yesterday. She leaned back in her chair. The leather creaked softly beneath her. And for the first time in years, Evelyn Carter felt something she didn't allow herself to feel. Anger, not sharp, not explosive, but deep, layered, complicated. Anger at him, at the doctor, at the system, at herself, for not questioning, for not pushing, for accepting the answer she had been given, because it came from someone she trusted. Her throat tightened, but no tears came. They didn't, not anymore. She had trained herself out of that a long time ago. Instead, she sat there, still, processing, holding the weight of it without letting it spill. Her phone buzzed again. "Marcus, a message. You don't have to figure it out tonight." She stared at the words, simple, direct, no pressure, no expectation, just there. She exhaled slowly, then typed. I read it. 3 dots appeared, paused, disappeared. Then, "I'm sorry." She looked at the screen, at the apology, and something in her shifted again. "You didn't do it," she replied. "I know," he wrote back, "but you shouldn't have to carry it alone." Evelyn's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She wasn't used to this, to someone speaking into the space without trying to fix it, without trying to explain it away. Just there, with her. "He thought he was protecting me," she typed. A pause. Then, "Yeah," Marcus replied. "I think he did," she swallowed. "That doesn't make it right." "No," he said, "it doesn't." Silence followed, but it wasn't empty. It was full of something. Unresolved. Real. Evelyn leaned her head back against the chair, staring at the ceiling, the lines of the building stretching above her. And for a moment, she let herself feel it all, the loss, the anger, the confusion, the strange, quiet understanding that sat beneath it. He had loved her, that much was still true, and he had been wrong, that was true too. Both things could exist at the same time, and she had to decide what to do with that. Her phone buzzed once more. Marcus again. What are you going to do? She stared at the question, because the answer wasn't simple, wasn't obvious, wasn't something she could calculate like a business strategy or a market shift. It was something else, something personal, something that would shape everything that came next. She looked down at her legs, still, but not empty, not anymore. Back at the city, alive, unmoving in its own way, constant. And for the first time since she opened those files, Evelyn Carter made a decision, not about the past, that couldn't be changed, but about what came next. I'm not stopping, she typed. The reply came quickly. Good. She almost smiled, just slightly, because for the first time in hours, something felt clear again. Not the truth, not the pain, but the direction. And sometimes, that was enough to keep going, but not enough to make it easy. The next morning, Manhattan looked exactly the same. Glass towers catching the early light, yellow cabs slipping through traffic, people moving fast, heads down, chasing schedules that didn't wait for anyone. Evelyn Carter rolled through the lobby of her building like she always did, composed, precise, unreadable. No one looking at her would have guessed that the ground beneath her life had shifted overnight, that the past she had built herself on was no longer solid. Good morning, Miss Carter, the receptionist said. Evelyn nodded once. Morning. Her voice was steady, perfect, controlled, just like always. But inside, everything was louder. Every thought carried weight. Every memory felt different. Because now she wasn't just remembering what had happened. She was questioning what hadn't. The rehab center felt colder that day. Or maybe it was just her. Daniel noticed it immediately. You okay? He asked, adjusting the settings on the equipment. Evelyn didn't answer right away. She positioned her hands on the armrests, her posture straight, her expression neutral. I'm here, she said. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right, let's start. The session began the same way as before. Small signals, controlled stimulation, careful observation. But something was different. Evelyn wasn't just waiting to feel something anymore. She was searching for it. Pushing, testing. As if the answer might be hiding just beneath the surface, waiting to be forced into the open. Relax, Daniel said gently. You're overthinking it. I'm not, she replied. But she was, because now, this wasn't just about recovery, it was about truth, about everything she had been told, about everything she had accepted, and the idea that it might all have been incomplete. It didn't just change the future, it rewrote the past. Evelyn, Daniel said again, quieter this time. You're holding tension. She closed her eyes briefly, forced herself to breathe, to slow down, because he was right, and she hated that he was right. Again, she said. The machine hummed softly, the signal pulsed, and then, there it was, faint, unclear, but real, a flicker of something along her right leg, not strong, not controlled, but present. Evelyn's breath caught. Did you feel that? Daniel asked. This time, she didn't hesitate. Yes, the word came out sharp, certain, because it wasn't imagination, it wasn't hope, it was there. Daniel smiled slightly. Good, he said. That's progress. Progress. Such a simple word. But it carried so much more now, because every inch forward was a reminder of how far back she might have been held. That night, she didn't go home. She stayed in her office. Again. The city outside blurred into a wash of light and shadow as the hours passed. Her phone sat on the desk, silent. Marcus hadn't texted, and she hadn't reached out, not because she didn't want to, but because she needed space to think, to process, to decide who she was now, in a world where her past was no longer what she thought it was. Her father's words echoed in her mind. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't fixing something, it's knowing when to stop. Evelyn let out a slow breath. "You didn't get to decide that for me," she said quietly. The room didn't answer, but the weight of the words stayed. The board meeting the next morning was worse, not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't, the glances, the pauses, the subtle shifts in tone. Helen Brooks sat at the far end of the table, her posture flawless, her expression calm. Too calm. "Before we begin," Helen said, her voice smooth, "there's a matter of leadership continuity I'd like to address." Evelyn didn't react. She simply folded her hands on the table. "Go ahead." Helen nodded slightly. "There have been observations," she continued, "regarding your recent schedule changes." Evelyn met her gaze. "My schedule is within operational limits." "Of course," Helen said. "But perception matters." There it was. Not an accusation. Not directly, but close enough. "Perception of what?" Evelyn asked. Helen tilted her head slightly. "Of distraction," the word hung in the air. Carefully chosen, carefully placed. The other board members shifted subtly, not speaking, not interfering, watching, always watching. Evelyn leaned back slightly. "And you believe I'm distracted?" she asked. "I believe," Helen said, "that any significant personal matter has the potential to impact executive performance." Evelyn held her gaze, unblinking. "And what exactly do you think I'm dealing with?" she asked. Helen didn't hesitate. "That's not the question." "No," Evelyn said calmly. "It's exactly the question, slants tight, controlled. The kind that stretched just enough to make everyone uncomfortable." Helen smiled faintly. "As I said," she replied, "this is about continuity." Evelyn nodded slowly. "I see," and in that moment, she understood. This wasn't concern, this wasn't governance, this was opportunity. Helen wasn't reacting to her situation. She was positioning herself around it, waiting for a moment of weakness, a slip, a crack, anything that could justify a shift in power. Evelyn's fingers tightened slightly against the table, just enough for her to feel it, not enough for anyone else to notice. "Then let's proceed with the meeting," she said. Her voice didn't change, didn't falter, didn't give them anything. Because if there was one thing Evelyn Carter understood, it was control, and she wasn't about to lose it, not here, not now. Later that afternoon, she sat alone in her office again. The city stretched out below her, unchanged. But this time, she didn't look at it. She looked at herself, at the reflection in the glass. The woman she had been for 30 years, strong, certain, untouchable, and now, uncertain, exposed. "Human," her phone buzzed. "Marcus." She stared at the name for a moment, then answered. "Hey," he said. His voice was the same, grounded, steady, unaffected by boardrooms or billion-dollar decisions. "You busy?" he asked. She glanced around the empty office. "Nope." I pause. "How are you?" he asked. The question was simple, but it landed harder than anything Helen had said that morning. Evelyn hesitated. Not because she didn't know the answer, but because she wasn't sure how to say it. "I don't know," she admitted. Marcus didn't rush to respond, didn't try to fix it. "I had another session today," she continued. "I felt something again." "That's good," he said. "It is," she agreed. "But it doesn't feel simple anymore." "No," he said. "I imagine it doesn't." She leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. "My father knew," she said quietly. Marcus was silent, listening. "He knew there was more to find," she continued, "and he chose not to look." A long pause. "Why?" Marcus asked. Evelyn closed her eyes. "Because he thought he was protecting me." Marcus exhaled softly. "Yeah," he said. That sounds about right. She opened her eyes again. And now I don't know what to do with that. You don't have to figure it out all at once, he said. She almost smiled. You say that a lot, because it's true. Silence settled between them again. But this time, it felt different, less heavy, less sharp, more grounded. I had a board meeting today, she said, and they're watching me. They've always been watching you, not like this. Marcus leaned back against his couch. What are they waiting for? He asked. Evelyn's gaze dropped to her hands. For me to break, she said. Another pause. And are you going to? He asked. She considered that. Carefully. Honestly. No, she said. The word came out stronger this time. More certain. Because even with everything shifting, even with everything uncertain, there was one thing she still knew. She didn't break. Not easily, not quietly. Good, Marcus said, and just like that, something inside her steadied. Not completely, not permanently, but enough. Enough to keep moving. Enough to face whatever came next. Because now, it wasn't just about walking. It was about reclaiming something she never realized she had lost. And she wasn't about to let anyone, not her father, not the board, not even her own fear, take that away from her again. The room was quiet except for the low hum of the equipment. Soft white lights stretched across the ceiling, reflecting off polished floors that had seen hundreds of patients come and go, some leaving stronger, some leaving the same, some never coming back at all. Evelyn Carter stood between the parallel bars, standing. Even now, that alone carried weight. Her hands gripped the cold metal, knuckles pale, shoulders tight with effort. The therapist stood a few feet away, watching carefully, not interfering, not stepping in too soon. Take your time, Daniel said quietly. Evelyn didn't respond. She was focused, not on him, not on the room, not even on the pain. She was focused on something far more fragile, the possibility that this might work. Her right leg trembled. The muscles, unused for so long, struggled to hold tension. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't controlled. It was raw, uncertain, imperfect. But it was there. Shift your weight, Daniel instructed, slowly, carefully. Evelyn leaned forward just enough to feel the change. The pressure moved, her breath caught. Because this was new, this wasn't imagined, this wasn't hope, this was physics. Her body responding in a way it hadn't in decades. Good, Daniel said. Now hold it. She held, for 1 second, then 2, then 3. Her left leg buckled slightly. Her grip tightened instinctively, the metal bars digging into her palms as she steadied herself. I've got you, Daniel said, stepping closer, but not touching her. Not yet. Evelyn exhaled sharply. Frustration flickered across her face. Again, she said. Her voice was tight, determined, because she wasn't leaving that room without trying again. The second attempt was worse. Too much force, too much expectation. Her body didn't respond the same way, and she felt it immediately. The imbalance, the instability, the way her right leg hesitated, then failed. Daniel caught her this time, steadying her before she could fall completely. Easy, he said. Evelyn pulled back slightly, regaining control of her breathing. I'm fine, I know, he replied. But this isn't about pushing harder. It's about learning again. Learning. The word settled into her mind. Because that's what this was. Not recovery, not correction. Learning from the beginning. From nothing. And for someone like Evelyn Carter, that was the hardest part. She didn't start from nothing. She built, she controlled, she mastered. But this required patience, and patience had never been her strength. She stepped back, repositioning her hands on the bars, closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. Once more, she said. Daniel nodded. Once more. The third attempt felt different. Not easier, not stronger, but clearer. Evelyn didn't rush it this time. She didn't force it. She simply moved. A slight shift, a controlled breath. Her left foot lifted. Barely. Just enough. Then set back down. Her right leg followed. Unsteady, shaking, but moving. One step. The room seemed to pause around her. Daniel didn't speak, didn't move, didn't even breathe too loudly. Because he knew moments like this couldn't be interrupted. Evelyn took another step. And then she stopped. Not because she had to, but because she realized what she had just done. She stood there, frozen in place, the weight of it settling in slowly. Her chest rose and fell. Her grip on the bars loosened slightly. She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Daniel smiled softly. "That's it," he said. "That's your first step. First." Such a small word, but it carried 30 years inside it. Evelyn didn't cry. She didn't laugh. She didn't react the way most people would expect. She just stood there, processing. Because the feeling wasn't explosive, it wasn't dramatic, it was quiet. Deep, like something inside her had shifted into place after being out of alignment for far too long. She looked down at her legs, at the space she had just crossed. 2 feet, maybe 3. It didn't matter, because distance wasn't the point. The point was, she had done it, not imagined it, not hoped for it, done it. Her jaw tightened slightly, not from pain, from realization. Everything she had been told, everything she had believed, everything she had built her life around, was no longer absolute, and that was both terrifying and freeing. That night, she didn't call the board, didn't call her therapist, didn't even call her mother. She called Marcus. He answered on the first ring. "Hey." Evelyn didn't speak right away. She sat in the back of her car, the city passing by in blurred lights, her reflection faint in the window. "I took a step," she said finally. Silence then. "What?" Marcus asked. Not disbelief, just shock today, she said, in therapy. Another pause, longer this time, because the weight of that statement needed somewhere to land. "You're serious," he said. "I don't say things like that unless I am." A breath. Then another. Marcus leaned back against his couch, running a hand over his face. "Evelyn," he said quietly. She could hear it in his voice, the shift, the pride, the disbelief. All of it. "It wasn't much," she added. "A couple of steps. That's everything," he said. She almost smiled. Not fully, but enough to feel it. "I thought it would feel different," she admitted. "How does it feel?" She looked down again, at her legs, at the memory of movement still lingering in her body. "Quiet," she said. Marcus nodded to himself. "Yeah," he said. "That makes sense." Another pause. "You okay?" he asked. Evelyn considered the question, really considered it. Because for the first time in a long time, the answer wasn't simple. "I think so," she said. "You think so?" "I don't know what comes next," she admitted. Marcus exhaled softly. "You don't have to know that tonight," he said. She almost laughed. "You say that a lot, and you still don't believe me. I'm starting to." That surprised her, because it was true. She was starting to believe that not knowing didn't mean losing control. That uncertainty could exist without breaking her. "I should let you go," she said after a moment. "All right, Marcus, yeah?" She hesitated, said it anyway. "Thank you." There was no hesitation in his response. "You're welcome," simple, honest, uncomplicated, just like everything else about him. She ended the call, and for a moment, she just sat there, letting the quiet settle around her. Because today, something had changed, not just in her body, but in her life, in the way she saw herself, in the way she understood the past, and in the way she was starting to imagine the future. She looked out at the city, at the lights, at the endless movement of people who had no idea what had just happened in a small therapy room across town. And for the first time in a very long time, Evelyn Carter allowed herself to feel something close to hope. Not the kind that promises anything, not the kind that guarantees an outcome, but the kind that simply says, keep going, one step at a time. That had become her rhythm, not just in therapy, in everything. The mornings came earlier now, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The city still slept when she woke, the skyline dim and quiet, like it hadn't decided what it would be yet. She liked that version of it, unfinished, uncertain, honest. Evelyn stood by the window in her apartment, her crutches leaning against the wall just a few feet away. She didn't reach for them immediately. Instead, she tested the ground. Barefoot, slowly shifting her weight, feeling it, the pressure, the balance, the risk. Her right leg trembled. Her left followed. Not steady, not strong, but not empty either. She took one step, then another. 2 steps across polished wood floors that had once only reflected her image, now carried her. She stopped, breathed, let the moment settle, then reached for the crutches. Because progress wasn't about proving something. It was about sustaining it. By the time she reached the office, the city was fully awake. The lobby buzzed with movement. Assistants crossing paths, phones ringing, coffee being carried in paper cups that smelled like rushed mornings. Everything looked the same, but it wasn't. Because this time, Evelyn didn't roll through the doors. She walked, slow, measured, each step supported by the crutches, her posture steady, her gaze forward. The security guard blinked, just once. Not dramatically, not loudly, but enough. Enough for her to notice, enough for the moment to register. She didn't acknowledge it, didn't pause. She just kept moving, because this wasn't for them. It wasn't a performance. It was her life. By the time she reached the executive floor, word had already begun to spread. It didn't need confirmation. Didn't need a press release. People saw and people talked. She's walking. Is that real? I thought. The whispers followed her down the hallway, like echoes she didn't turn around to face. Marcus was waiting outside her office. Not the driver, not the man from the Bronx, her chief of staff, Marcus Hale. His expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes gave him away. You didn't tell me, he said quietly. Evelyn paused in front of him. No, she replied. Why? She looked at him. Really looked. Because this question mattered. Because I didn't want it to become a headline before it became real, she said. He nodded slowly. That made sense. It always did when she explained it. I assume this changes things, he added. Evelyn's grip tightened slightly on the crutches. Everything changes things, she said, and nothing does. Marcus almost smiled. That sounds like you. It is. They stood there for a moment. Then, board meeting at 11, he said. Helen requested an updated discussion on executive performance. Of course she did. Evelyn nodded once. I'll be there. The boardroom felt different today, not because of the space, but because of the attention. Every eye tracked her as she entered. Every movement measured, calculated, observed. She didn't rush, didn't hide. She walked, step by step, across the polished floor, until she reached her chair, then sat. The silence that followed wasn't accidental. It was deliberate, because no one knew what to say. Not yet. Helen Brooks broke it first. Well, she said, her tone smooth, almost impressed. That's unexpected. Evelyn met her gaze. Is it? She asked. Helen smiled faintly, for someone who was supposedly stable in her condition for 3 decades. Yes, the room tightened. Subtle, controlled. Evelyn leaned back slightly. I've learned recently that not everything I was told was complete, she said. Helen's eyes flickered, just for a second, then steadied. That must be, disorienting. It's clarifying, Evelyn corrected. A pause. Then Helen folded her hands on the table. Regardless, she said, we're here to discuss leadership continuity. Of course they were, Evelyn nodded. Then let's discuss it. The conversation that followed wasn't loud. It wasn't explosive. It was worse. It was precise. Every word chosen carefully. Every implication wrapped in professionalism. Helen laid out her concerns. Subtle, strategic, the demands of the company, the pressure of the market, the importance of stability, all valid. All designed to lead to one conclusion, that Evelyn Carter might no longer be the best person to lead, not because she wasn't capable, but because she was changing. And change was risk. Evelyn listened, didn't interrupt, didn't react, because she understood something now that she hadn't fully grasped before. This wasn't about her health. It never had been. It was about control, and who held it. When Helen finished, the room went quiet again, waiting for Evelyn to respond. She leaned forward slightly, resting her hands on the table, and spoke. "Let me be very clear," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "I have built this company from the ground up. No one moved. I have led it through expansion, crisis, and growth that none of you predicted. Eyes stayed fixed, listening, measuring, and I have done it," she continued, "while managing a condition that you all believed was permanent, a beat. Now, they were paying attention, fully." Evelyn's gaze shifted to Helen, and now, she said, "that condition is changing." Helen didn't blink. "And you see that as instability," Evelyn added. "I see it as uncertainty," Helen replied. Evelyn nodded slowly. "Then you misunderstand the situation." The words landed clean, sharp, because they weren't defensive, they were decisive. "This isn't instability," she said. "This is proof." A pause. "Proof that I was operating at full capacity under limitations that no longer apply." Silence. Now, because that wasn't what they expected. Evelyn leaned back, calm, controlled, unshaken. "If I could run this company at that level before," she continued, "then I can run it at a higher level now." No one spoke. No one challenged it, because the logic was solid, unavoidable. Helen's expression shifted slightly, not defeated, but recalibrating, because she understood. The angle she had prepared no longer worked. "Of course," Helen said smoothly. "We'll take that under consideration." Evelyn held her gaze. "You will," she said, and that was the end of it. Not with a vote, not with a confrontation, but with a shift, subtle, permanent. That evening, Evelyn didn't go back to the office. She went somewhere else, somewhere quieter, a small park tucked between buildings, where the noise of the city softened just enough to breathe. She stood near the path, crutches steady, watching people pass, couples, children, someone walking a dog that pulled too hard on its leash. Ordinary life, uncomplicated. And for a moment, she let herself exist inside it. Not as a CEO, not as a symbol, just as a person. Her phone buzzed. Marcus, the other Marcus. She smiled slightly before answering. "Hey," she said. "You sound different," he replied. She looked out at the path, at the fading light. "I am." A pause. "How'd it go?" he asked. She thought about the boardroom, the tension, the shift. "They tried," she said, "and they failed." He chuckled softly. "Yeah," he said, "that sounds about right." She leaned slightly on the crutch, comfortable, balanced. "I walked into the room today," she added. "I figured. They didn't expect it. They never do." She smiled again, a little more this time. "No," she said, "they don't." Silence settled between them, easy, familiar. "What now?" he asked. Evelyn looked up at the sky, at the city stretching around her, at the life that had been one thing and was becoming something else. "Now," she said slowly, "I take the next step." And this time, she knew exactly what that meant. It didn't mean victory. It didn't mean everything was suddenly easy. It didn't mean the past stopped hurting, or the future became certain. It meant she kept going, even when it was hard, even when it cost her, even when no one was watching. A year later, Central Park looked different. Or maybe she did. The trees had started to turn, leaves shifting into deep reds and golds that caught the afternoon light. The air carried that early autumn crispness, the kind that made everything feel sharper, clearer, alive. Evelyn Carter stepped onto the path slowly, no crutches this time, not today. Her stride wasn't perfect, it wasn't smooth or effortless. There was still hesitation in it, a slight imbalance that only someone paying close attention would notice, but it was hers. Every step, every shift, every movement, earned. Marcus walked beside her, hands in his jacket pockets, moving at her pace without rushing, without leading, just there. Like he had been from the beginning, a few feet ahead, Lila ran along the path, her laughter cutting through the quiet in a way that made the entire space feel warmer. She stopped suddenly, crouching down to pick up something from the ground. "Look," she called out. Marcus smiled. "What is it?" he asked. "A leaf," she said, holding it up like it was something rare. "It's perfect." Evelyn watched her for a moment, the way she studied it, the way she cared, and something inside her softened. "She sees things most people don't," Evelyn said quietly. Marcus glanced at her. "Yeah," he said. "She does." They walked a little further, slow, unhurried, not trying to get anywhere, just being. And that was new for Evelyn, because her entire life had been about movement, progress, direction, control. But now, she understood something different, that not every step needed to lead somewhere. Some steps were enough on their own. They stopped near a bench overlooking the water. The surface reflected the sky in broken pieces, ripples shifting with the wind. Evelyn sat down carefully, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Marcus remained standing for a moment before sitting beside her. Lila wandered a few steps away, still examining her leaf like it held some secret the rest of the world had missed. "You've come a long way," Marcus said. Evelyn let out a quiet breath. "Not as far as people think," she replied. He shook his head slightly. "Further than most ever will." She didn't argue, because for once, she wasn't measuring it that way. Her gaze drifted across the water. "I used to think the miracle would be walking again," she said. Marcus waited, because he knew there was more. She turned slightly toward him. "It's not," she said. He frowned, just slightly. "No?" She shook her head. "The miracle was that day in my office," she said. His brow furrowed. "When you said my foot moved," Marcus exhaled softly. "That wasn't a miracle," he said. "That was just... It was everything," she interrupted gently. He went quiet, because the way she said it left no room for argument. "If you hadn't said anything," she continued, "I would have kept going exactly the way I was." Her voice stayed calm, measured, but there was something underneath it, something real. "I would have lived my entire life believing something that wasn't completely true," she said. Marcus looked down at his hands, then back at her. "I just said what I saw," he said. She smiled slightly. "I know," a pause. "That's why it mattered." The wind picked up slightly, rustling the leaves around them. Lila ran back over, dropping onto the bench beside Evelyn without hesitation. "You're getting better," she said matter-of-factly. Evelyn glanced at her. "I am. You'll be running soon," Lila added. Marcus chuckled. "Let's not rush it." Lila shrugged. "I'm just saying," Evelyn laughed. Not a quiet smile, not a controlled reaction. A real laugh, the kind that surprised her every time it happened. Because it didn't feel practiced. It didn't feel managed. It just was, maybe, she said. Lila nodded, satisfied with that answer. then turned her attention back to her leaf. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the path. People passed by. Some noticed Evelyn, some didn't. Some looked twice, trying to place something that felt familiar but different. She didn't mind anymore, because this wasn't about them. It wasn't about proving anything. It wasn't about showing the world what she had achieved. It was about something quieter, something deeper, something that had taken her a year to understand. She leaned back slightly against the bench, letting the moment settle. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was chasing something. She felt like she had arrived, not at the end, but at a place that made sense, a place that felt real. "You know what's strange?" she said after a while. Marcus glanced at her. "What?" She looked out at the water again. "For 30 years, I thought my life had already been decided," she said. He nodded. "And now?" She smiled faintly. "Now I know it wasn't." A pause. Not even close. Marcus leaned back, resting his arms on the bench. "Yeah," he said. "That sounds about right." Lila looked between them. "You guys talk weird," she said. Evelyn laughed again. "Probably," she admitted. Lila shrugged. "Whatever, as long as you keep walking." Evelyn met her eyes. "I will." And she meant it, not because she had to, not because she was proving something, but because she wanted to, because she had the chance, because she had seen what was possible when someone refused to ignore what was real. They stood a few minutes later. Evelyn stepped forward. Slow, steady. Marcus walked beside her, not leading, not following, just there, and Lila ran ahead again, her voice echoing through the park as the light faded into evening. 3 people, 3 different lives, connected by something simple, something unexpected, something that had started with a single moment that almost didn't happen. As they reached the edge of the path, Evelyn paused, just for a second, looking back at where she had been, at the distance she had crossed, not measured in steps, but in choices, in moments, in the decision not to turn away. She took another step, then another, and didn't look back again. Because the truth was, there are moments in life that don't look important, don't feel dramatic, they don't announce themselves, they just happen. A stranger says something, you almost ignore it, almost move on, almost stay the same. But you don't. And everything changes. Evelyn Carter lost 30 years to certainty and found her life again. Because one man chose to speak up, because one moment wasn't ignored, because she didn't send him away. And somewhere out there are still stories waiting to begin. All they need is someone willing to see them. If this story touched you, leave a comment, because in the end, it wasn't the moment Evelyn Carter stood up in that quiet therapy room that changed everything. It was the moment she chose not to send Marcus away when he simply told the truth. Sometimes, one honest sentence, spoken at the right moment, can break through years of fear, doubt, and silence. And it reminds us that real courage isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's just saying what you see when everyone else looks away. So today, if you notice something small, someone struggling, someone overlooked, don't stay quiet. Say it, ask it, reach out. Because that one moment might be exactly what changes someone's life. Just like Marcus did for Evelyn. Have you ever had a moment where someone said something simple, but it changed everything for you? Tell me below. And if you think this was powerful, wait until you hear what happens in the next story.